founder of Oath Keepers convicted of seditious conspiracy. New GOP speaker cannot remove Ilhan Omar. Uyghur Americans protest Chinese government in Washington. Pakistani Taliban end ceasefire with government, order new attacks. Bilkis Bano moves Indian Supreme Court challenging release of her rapists. Nearly 9 in 10 COVID deaths are in people 65 or older. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight, Stewart Rhodes, founder of the far-right Oath Keepers militia, was convicted by a federal jury of seditious conspiracy. That was for his leading role in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol. The Oath Keepers militia mobilized its supporters for former President Donald Trump's big lie that the 2020 presidential election had been stolen from him. The Washington, D.C. jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Rhodes and co-defendant Kelly Meggs guilty of seditious conspiracy. 3 others who were accused were acquitted of that charge. Additionally, all 5 defendants were convicted of obstructing Congress as it convened to certify the results of the 2020 election. Both crimes are punishable by up to 20 years imprisonment. About 900 people have been charged with federal crimes in connection with the January 6 insurrection. So far, around 450 of the defendants have pleaded guilty. A new report has found that the U.S. government continues to spend disproportionately on international terrorist threats over domestic ones. Federal law enforcement agencies have in recent years acknowledged that white supremacy represents a major threat to public safety in the United States. However, the new U.S. Senate report reveals that authorities continue to pour resources into fighting international threats instead of addressing extremism in the U.S. The 130-page report was issued after a 3-year investigation by the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee this month. It details how the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security have failed to adequately align resources to address the threat from domestic terrorism. The Senate committee's recommendations call for Congress to require a whole-of-government review of all federal counterterrorism efforts. Lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives voted Wednesday by a margin of 221 to 207 to pass a concurrent resolution adding 7 days of paid sick leave for rail workforce workers. If passed by the Senate, it will add a White House brokered contract that was rejected by over half of the nation's unionized rail workforce. Representative Jamal Bowman led the fight to add 7 days of paid sick leave. The White House negotiated proposal was rejected by a number of railway unions for its lack of sick leave. Senator Bernie Sanders said that major rail carriers have made an estimated $21 billion in profit over the last 3 quarters. Yet they have offered railway workers 0 guaranteed sick leave. Uyghur Americans gathered in front of the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. to protest against the Chinese government. Uyghurs activists claim that at least 40 Uyghurs were killed in Urumqi, the capital of eastern Turkestan, or what the Chinese government calls Xinjiang. Uyghur Muslims in China's Xinjiang region have been subjected to years of abuse because of their identity and culture, according to international human rights organizations. At least 1 million Uyghurs are said to be kept against their will at what the Chinese government calls vocational training centers. But critics say the places are meant for indoctrination, abuse, and torture. China strongly denies allegations of human rights abuses in East Turkestan. 90% of new COVID deaths are now occurring amongst people 65 years or older. It is the highest rate since the pandemic began. Some epidemiologists predict the trend of older, sicker, and poorer people dying at disproportionate rates will only continue. More than 300 people are still dying each day on average from COVID-19, according to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The Supreme Court on Monday issued a forceful and detailed rebuttal to ethics concerns raised by two Democratic lawmakers. Democrats have raised objections to religious conservatives whining and dining with some justices. The court's response came in a letter to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse and Congressman Hank Johnson. Both Democrats respectively chair the Senate and House Judiciary Court subcommittees. The lawmakers suggested a congressional probe into Justice Samuel Alito's socialization if the court did not launch its own inquiry into the claims. This was after a bombshell New York Times report detailing a former anti-abortion activist's efforts to gain access to Supreme Court justices. Reverend Rob Schenck, former president of right-wing group Faith in Action, alleged that Alito leaked the court's decision in the contraception-related case Burwell versus Hobby Lobby to Faith in Action donors. Whitehouse and Johnson had asked Chief Justice John Roberts to explain whether the Supreme Court opened an investigation into this and other allegations. The Supreme Court's legal counsel Ethan Torrey, responding, noted that there is nothing unethical about Justice Alito's actions. A story on the new GOP speaker that cannot remove Ilhan Omar comes with details after the break, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
A free 3-minute online chat can give you the personalized tips you need to start boosting your retirement savings today.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Projected GOP Speaker Representative Kevin McCarthy has promised to remove Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from committee assignments. Omar currently serves at the Foreign Affairs Committee. The hijab-wearing progressive Muslim Democrat has long been a target of the Republican Party and former President Donald Trump. McCarthy said he wants to remove Omar for condemning the Israelis for what she says are unthinkable atrocities in the Palestinian territories last June. He labels Omar's criticisms as anti-Semitic comments. But McCarthy may not be able to remove her. Writing for The Hill, Don Wolfensberger said McCarthy does not have the right to remove Omar because she is elected to it by the House. Wolfensberger is the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Senior Israeli diplomats are scrambling to distance their government from disparaging remarks made by an Israeli filmmaker about the controversial film Kashmir Files. The Indian government has used the film as a central plank of its narrative on Kashmiri history. Award-winning Israeli filmmaker Nadav Lapid described the Kashmir Files as propaganda, vulgar, and inappropriate for an artistic festival. On Tuesday, several current and former ambassadors began publishing statements condemning Lapid. Lapid was speaking as head of the jury of the competition section of feature films at the closing ceremony of the 53rd International Film Festival in India held in Goa. We were, all of us, disturbed and shocked by the 15th film by the movie The Kashmir Files, Lapid said. That seemed to us like a propaganda, vulgar movie inappropriate for an artistic, competitive section of such a prestigious film festival. On Monday, the Pakistani Taliban, or TTB, said they have formally called off a ceasefire agreed upon with the Pakistani government in June. The decision was announced through a statement released by the TTP on its website and was also sent to some journalists. The militant network's so-called defense ministry called on all of its affiliates to carry out attacks against security forces wherever you can reach across the country. There was no immediate reaction to the announcement from the government or the military. In June, the Pakistani government and the TTP reached an agreement on an indefinite ceasefire. Iranian authorities have arrested a niece of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Farideh Moradkhani was arrested after she recorded a video describing the authorities led by her uncle as a murderous and child-killing regime. Moradkhani comes from a branch of the family that has a record of opposition to Iran's clerical leadership. She and her father have been jailed previously in the country. Moradkhani is the daughter of Khamenei's sister. On Saturday, Russia claimed that the U.S. developed a synthetic coronavirus pathogen based on the Omicron strain in the original Wuhan variety. Igor Kirillov is head of biological and chemical defense troops. In a news conference, he said the modified virus acquired by the Americans killed 80% of infected model animals. It caused abnormal neurological signs and significant lung damage. He added that antibody testing revealed an 11-fold decline in their capacity to neutralize the new virus, as well as the ineffectiveness on current vaccinations. Kirillov said the modified virus was developed by Boston University. He noted that the U.S. continues its military biological activities in third world countries and prefers conducting experiments abroad because of the high risk of accidents. Russia, he said, will demand the creation of an effective mechanism for monitoring such activities at the upcoming meeting of the Biological Weapons Convention. Bilkis Bano has approached the Indian Supreme Court to challenge the premature release of 11 convicts who gang-raped her. The men killed 14 of her family members, including her 3-year-old daughter, during the 2002 anti-Muslim pogroms in the city of Gujarat. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was Chief Minister of Gujarat at the time, has been accused of aiding and abetting the killings and violence. Advocate Shobha Gupta, appearing on behalf of Bano, urged the Chief Justice of India to allow the case to be heard in an open court. The convicts walked out of the jail on August 15th after a Gujarat government panel approved their release. One member of the panel, a leading member of India's ruling BJP-RSS regime, said that since they were Brahmin, they deserved to be released. Brahmin is the highest caste in India of high privilege. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me, for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. To discuss the West's criticism over the FIFA World Cup being hosted in Qatar, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Saamiyah. World Cup is happening in Qatar, but at the same time, Qatar is being turned into a football itself. Lot of criticism, hardly any game when it comes to news. We have Robert Carter with us. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you very much for having me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Robert Carter is a British journalist and a YouTuber working for Press TV in London. Why the coverage of World Cup sounds like it does?
Well, quite frankly, there's open season in the Western world when it comes to criticism of Muslims and Islam. And I think that this has been reflected very much so in the coverage of the World Cup, which for the first time ever in its history is being hosted by an Arab Muslim majority country from the Middle East. It's been well exposed, the hypocrisy regarding the coverage of the World Cup here in Qatar. I mean, of course, Qatar is by no means a perfect country, and there is room for criticism of freedom of speech in order to criticize any host country of any sporting competition. But the fact of the matter is that the Qataris have been treated far differently to how other major countries who have hosted the World Cup and other sporting competitions have been treated by Western media. A few examples would be, say, Russia, the last hosts of the World Cup, who have very similar outlooks in regards to things like the LGBT movement, which Qatar has been getting routinely criticized for. Russia, of course, was pretty much free from any criticism during that time. Also, another good example would be the Israeli regime, which hosted the Eurovision Song Contest on more than one occasion, practically criticism-free, despite the ongoing human rights abuses against the Palestinian people. So clearly, there is something wrong with the coverage from Western media circles, particularly from Europe, in regards to Qatar. And the only reasonable reason why they would be treating Qatar different is because it's an Arab and a Muslim country. Surely that's got to be the reason, as that's the only thing that makes Qatar different to other countries which have hosted the competition before. And I can guarantee you that the criticism of the next World Cup host, which is the USA, will be practically invisible, to say the least, as it has been in the past, despite the fact that the biggest human rights abusers on the global stage is not the Qataris, it's not anyone from the Middle East, quite frankly, it's the US of A.
Well, we are a perfect country. We don't have any problems of what you're talking about. But isn't Qatar also a good friend of America, the perfect country, and has U.S. bases? Qatar helped America get out of Afghanistan by hosting Taliban on American behalf for the longest period of time. What happened to all that friendship?
Yes, that's a very good question. Qatar is a political ally of the West and has been for a very long time. And the fact of the matter is that Qatar has invested billions of dollars worth into Western economies, including here in Europe as well. But let this be a message to the Muslim world that no matter how much you compromise on your Islamic principles, no matter how much you placate and basically accommodate Western audiences, Western guests, Western countries, and their world viewpoints, it's not going to stop the fact that they will criticize you for being different. They will criticize you for your cultural beliefs, for your conservative worldview. They'll criticize you for your religious beliefs, no matter how much you cater for them, compromise, bend over in order to make the West happy politically with you. And Qatar is the greatest example of this. We've seen from past coverage of other conflicts, for example, in Ukraine, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, suffering civilians get way more coverage than innocent lives which are suffering in countries like Yemen, for example, parts of Africa and elsewhere in Asia. And that's simply because there is an emphasis on taking care of the Western world. And there is clearly a sense of, if there is suffering in the West, that's a greater priority than that in the Muslim, the African world, the Asian world, so on and so forth. So there is clearly a sense that if you're from Qatar, it's open season to criticize you and the way you live. And there is a great sense of white privilege and a sense of authority among Europeans and people in the West who feel that they are in a moral high ground position to go to these parts of the world and lecture locals on how they should live and behave. And I urge anyone from the Muslim world watching this to learn a lesson, to be proud of who you are, what your belief systems are, and to stand up for them and not always look to the West and simply compromise at every opportunity, because they're not there to basically reward you for that. They're still going to criticize, condemn, and push their worldview onto you, regardless of what you do in return.
Robert, do you think this is just a new chapter in the ongoing saga depicting Islam and Muslims in a particular way? Is it just a continuity of Islamophobia? Are we learning anything here?
Well, I think that Qatar will benefit from hosting the competition, despite all of the condemnation and criticism they've received from Western media circles and radical Western-based political and cultural ideologies. A lot of people are going there. Millions of people are going to visit over the course of the next few weeks and months, and they're going to witness what Arab and Muslim culture is really like behind those headlines. So I think that there will be some positives from Qatar hosting this competition, although I wish that they hadn't compromise so much on local culture and Islamic principles in order to cater for their guests. But still, there is a bit of dawah going on. They are showcasing what real Islam, real Arab culture is to many, many visitors. So hopefully there will be a kind of more positive view of the Arab and Muslim world among Western masses. But unfortunately, no, I think that there will still be a lot of criticism, a lot of negativity regarding the coverage of that part of the world. The media machine in the West here, the political machine in the West here, is not willing to change just because of a sporting competition. But again, I hope Muslims are going to look at what's happened here and learn from it, learn that we've got to build our own institutions, build our own communities, and stop hoping that the Western world will someday change and be more hospitable, more welcoming towards us. No one else will take care of Muslim community concerns if we don't do it ourselves.
How Qataris are responding to this negativity? Are they aware of it in Qatar on the streets, that it is being depicted in a particular way?
They're very aware of it. In fact, Qatari officials, including the senior leadership of the country, have been condemning it routinely even before the competition began. In fact, the Qatari World Cup chief has actually condemned the BBC, the British state's news channel, news platform, which has also been covering what's been going on in the World Cup as part of their sports coverage. They've actually been condemned by the Qataris for blatantly racist and inappropriate coverage, as many of their sports pundits are being used as some kind of propaganda mouthpiece to push a particular campaign which promotes things like the LGBT movement in the Muslim and Arab world, and condemns local laws and customs which are based on Islamic practices and principles, things like that. So this has been routinely condemned by the Qatari authorities. I think that all fans, Qatari, Muslim, and even non-Muslim fans, are getting quite sick of this, quite frankly. The World Cup is a sports event. People pay big money to go and watch the sport they love, not to be waterboarded with political messages from fringe radical ideologies which exist in the West, but actually are not the majority viewpoint across the rest of the world. So people need to stop pushing their narrow-minded views into the sporting arena just because it's hosted by an Arab Muslim nation. If it was in reverse, they wouldn't like it. If Muslims went to Europe during sporting competitions hosted there and started telling them, you need to implement Islamic law in your countries to cater for our needs, they wouldn't like it. They wouldn't tolerate it. Muslims, the Qataris, need to stop tolerating it as well and actually get the handcuffs out in some cases if necessary.
Do you think some of the criticism which is connected with the immigrant worker not being treated well, do you find that criticism legitimate?
Of course, a single unjust migrant death is unacceptable. There's no doubt about that. And criticism on this issue has been around way before the World Cup even began. But the fact of the matter is that many Western media platforms have been pushing numbers regarding migrant deaths, which the Qatari authorities believe are grossly exaggerated, grossly inflated, and are not true. So there's a massive dispute over the numbers of migrants who have died as a result of the construction of the World Cup facilities in Qatar. The Qatari authorities have admitted to some, but those numbers are much smaller than what the Western world is pushing out there. And again, it falls into the question of what's true, what's not, what's propaganda, why are these numbers being exaggerated if they are? And is it a case of the Qataris being treated differently because of the fact that they're a Muslim and Arab country? And it appears that that is the case. I don't believe what the BBC, for example, a propaganda outfit which pushed lies regarding the Iraq invasion and occupation for many, many years, is saying about any Muslim country, especially the country hosting the World Cup. So let's just put it into perspective. The numbers are disputed, and let's try and keep to the facts here, and let's not just assume that because the Qataris are Arab or Muslim that they are automatically evil or they're killing people on purpose. Let's just put that to one side and try and focus on what the positive aspects of this story are, which is that there is a lot of good stories coming out of the World Cup. You look at the opening ceremony, for example, the Quran that was quoted there, the fact that people are experiencing the Arab and Muslim culture in a unique way now. That part of the story also needs attention, not just the negative stories, which has been the crux of pretty much the entire Western world's coverage of this competition so far, which is a disgrace. It's biased, it's unfair, and it's discriminatory, in my opinion.
Well, thank you so much, Robert Carter, for your time. Totally appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Back to you, Saamiyah.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you so much for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.